Welcome, everyone. Good morning, I suspect, to most of you joining us across Latin America. We are here to carry out a new virtual panel, a new virtual Dataxis panel. Today, the title of this panel, Opportunities for AVOD in Latin America. We're going to be discussing advertising in the OTT world. This is a virtual panel that is sponsored by Canoe. So thanks, Canoe, for being our sponsor. As usual, we're going to be spending the next hour discussing the topic. We are going to have the last few minutes with opportunities for you to send questions to our panelists. I will introduce our two panelists for the discussion today. We have two companies, VIX and Canoe. VIX is, some people might remember, Batanga Media. It's what used to be Batanga Media. It did a rebranding to VIX in 2017. It's a digital media company serving mainly the US, Hispanic, and Latin American markets. And we have the CEO of VIX joining us today, Rafael Urbina, who's joining us from Miami. Canoe is a digital, it's an advertising technology company with a long history in that area. And joining us today out of New York is the company's SVP of Global Sales and Marketing, Chris Pisoro. So welcome, Chris, welcome, Rafael. We are going to start now. I think it's, we'd like to wait a few seconds for everybody to join us. As I mentioned, the topic for today, it's an opportunity for AVOD in Latin America. And VIX is one of the companies that we know, most of you will know that Dataxis is also a market intelligence company. So we like to look in detail what each actor is doing, how they're performing especially. And based on what we are seeing is really one of the fastest growing OTT companies in the AVOD sector. AVOD, just a reminder, advertising video on demand. So it's OTT companies that are monetizing their content through advertising rather than through a subscription-based or a transactional-based model. So Rafael, we know that we've seen the metrics, and you are really one of the fastest growing OTT services in Latin America, especially in Brazil, in Mexico, and the US Hispanic, which is the markets that you're serving. Interesting, you're not a company, a media company that is coming from the traditional TV world and is suddenly having to make a transition to the new streaming world. You were born already as a digital media company. So I think it would be interesting for you to help us understand how you're leveraging this experience on this very large footprint that you have on social media to develop your OTT strategy.
Sure, Juan Pablo. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity to talk a little bit about AVOD here today, which is always a favorite topic. Yeah, VIX is a digital media company at heart. We've been doing video on digital for well over a decade. We started with short form video, primarily focused on social media platforms. So that allowed us to generate a lot of content, build an audience. We were able to basically amass over 90 million followers across platforms like Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and build up kind of a scaled audience in the hundreds of millions of people in the US Hispanic and Latin markets. And then we saw, I would say about a year and a half ago, we saw this opportunity where we felt that we saw consumers spending more and more time with longer form content, even on their mobile devices. So we felt there was a tremendous opportunity to take that a step further and offer them long form content and build a platform around kind of long form content that was digital first, that was obviously, started with mobile, which is kind of where our strength, lied, but immediately kind of crossed over to connected TV as connected TV penetration grew or is growing in Latin America. So, we're coming out at it from the digital mobile side of things, and we've seen tremendous growth on platforms like Roku, Fire TV, Samsung TV, and others.
VIX is interesting, as I mentioned, and that's why you're so relevant in this discussion. You're exclusively monetizing your content through advertising.
Yes.
I think it would be interesting for you to describe what advertising formats work best in AVOD. We know we have these options of pre-rolls, mid-rolls, that there are sponsorship variations. What, in your experience, is working best?
Yes, I mean, I think a lot of it depends on the content that you're offering, right? And kind of the value exchange the tacit value exchange that you enter with the consumer, right? So in our case, we're offering a very deep library, over 20,000 hours of content. But a lot of that content may or may not be known to that specific consumer at that point in time. So we found that mid-roll ads are working best for us. And it's kind of the vast majority of what we do is around basically ad breaks of 4 to 6 ads every 10 to 12 minutes in the shows, right? In the shows or movies. So that's really kind of the main format. We've also had a lot of success around building branded channels for partners, right? So Target or McDonald's in the US, Coca-Cola in Mexico, the BRF in Brazil. So we've done these deals where we curate a content collection for a specific brand around a theme. We target we did Latino Voices, which was basically Latino filmmakers, and we curated a list of a couple dozen movies from Latino filmmakers for Hispanic Heritage Month. It was brought to you by Target, and that actually became our most popular channel during Hispanic Heritage Month. So those are the sort of things that you can do that go a little bit beyond the traditional spots and dots on the media side. But the beauty of it is that the spots and dots perform incredibly well, right? Completion rates are very high, viewability rates are very high, audio on percentages are 100% basically. So I think that the fundamentals of the media product are very, very strong on AVOD. And I think a lot of folks that are, it really combines kind of the best of the digital video world with the best of the TV world, right? Where you have a highly engaged audience consuming content that's long form and are, they're willing to sit through a commercial break because they're engaged and immersed in a piece of content. So that's the best of TV, right? But then they also have the best of digital, right? The measurement, the targeting, the data that you can bring to bear. You can buy it, certainly you can buy it through a direct sales team, but you can also buy it programmatically. We could do private marketplace deals. You have all this sophistication that we can bring to bear from the digital side of things.
Very interesting, and you're touching on a lot of the topics that I think will be interesting for the rest of the discussion, from branded channels, branded content. You're setting the scene up very, very well. Programmatic. So I will come back to you on many of those just to expand the view. Chris, I think Rafael has given us a very good, again, introduction into the scene. Canoe really is a company with a lot, as I mentioned during the introduction, with many years of experience, particularly in the linear TV advertising industry. For the past few years, really, we've seen the TV advertising business, especially on the OTT distribution side, which is where companies like VIX are operating. We have seen a growing demand, as Rafael was putting very well, for addressable advertising opportunities. What trends are you currently seeing in terms of addressable ads with the clients that you're working with around the world?
Yeah, first of all, me too. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and share. I'll take it that addressability, meaning only serving an ad to a very specific TV audience versus broad reach, right? We'll kind of set it up that way. And TV's always been about broad reach. And as we just pointed out, digital has been about specific targeting. And now with OTT infrastructure, you have the promise of both reach and targeting from TV. So to keep pace with that on the pay TV infrastructure side, which is mainly where Canoe comes from and where our forte is, being owned by Comcast, Cox, and Charter in the US, we've been enabling addressable TV on linear and on AVOD. So trend I see right now is it's really people understanding that in order to have addressable TV, you first need to start with large scale. Otherwise, if you're looking to reach, say, left-handed bike riders in Mexico City, you might only reach 5 people if your scale isn't big enough in the first place. So I think companies are getting their addressable capabilities to scale, and that's across pay TV, across OTT, on linear, on AVOD, right? You need to get really all those capabilities up and running together so that you can run a campaign across all, so that when you run the campaign starting at scale, when you narrowly define the target, then you're not going to underdeliver. So, well, the key is start with big scale, start to drive down on the target, and then you'll be okay. That's really what people are starting to understand and what they're enabling.
Mm-hmm. Rafael, in terms of your audience accessing your content library, I think you mentioned that you have nearly 20 million installations of what I guess is your app already. Is that really the main way these days that your consumers are accessing your content through apps? How about the traditional web portal? What of the different sort of devices ecosystem that they have available? What are they using mainly?
Yeah, I mean, today there's 3 or 4 ways in which a consumer can get our services, right? I mean, one is they can go to our website, as you mentioned, and they can stream directly from the website. They can download a mobile app, they can download a connected TV app, or they can actually find us in third-party services. So we have linear channels with the Roku channel, with Sumo, with Redbox. I mean, other sort of services out there that are also kind of in this space. Today, the vast majority of our users are with the apps, right? Are with the mobile and connected TV apps. The reality is, and on web, it's a great way for people to sample the experience and the content. But once they like it, their tendency is to install the app, with a few exceptions. We do see some consumers, in markets like Brazil, for instance, we see where I think connected TV is less penetrated than it is in Mexico. We see that consumers are more keen to actually use their laptops to consume our service. But I'll say that platforms like Roku and Fire are growing very, very rapidly in Brazil as well. I mean, Roku has been in Mexico now for a number of years, but they launched in Brazil last year. And we can see that by our numbers, we can see the adoption curve is very strong. So I think ultimately we expect the bulk of it to be a combination of mobile and connected TV, and the same consumer just going from one to the other, right? I think that's a big part of the future here, and providing that flexibility to the consumer.
Yeah, and play off of that too. We've been amazed where 3 years ago, all of the AVOD on our platform was coming from pure traditional set-top box. Today, 40% of the viewing on AVOD comes from what we define as other platforms. Right? That could be an IP set-top box in the home. That could be the pay TV operator or app downloaded to a Roku device. But it's just been amazing just to see the transformation from 0 to 40%. All
3 years.
Just 3 years.
Incredible.
Give the consumer the choice, and they run with it.
Yeah, I think that's what it's all about. I mean, consumers are really craving choice and control over their entertainment experience, right? And I think as media companies, we all have to strive to find a way to do that and give them exactly that.
Do you both think whenever there's an app involved in the consumption, a mobile app. I mean, I will touch on the connected TV app in the next question, but whenever there's a mobile app, is it the case that users are then sort of broadcasting that content from the mobile app to a TV set, which might provide a better, especially for TV content, a better viewing experience? Or generally we're talking about younger generations who are happy with the viewing experience in the mobile device itself?
Yeah, not necessarily. There's certainly a large number of users that are using the casting feature, right? To they're going from mobile to a larger screen for sure. But that's not the majority. The majority of consumers are actually watching long form content on their mobile devices. That was really the insight that we found by playing in the social space, where we started doing 30-second videos, then we went to 90 seconds, then we went to 3 minutes, then we went to 6 minutes, and we just continued to see the engagement levels go up and up and up and up on mobile. We said, well, it's clear to us that this audience will consume long form content on their mobile devices, and they're perfectly, it's a natural thing for them. I think Netflix probably educated an entire generation on it. There's in Latin America alone, if you look at Comscore, I mean, last time I checked, Netflix has close to 100 million devices streaming, right? And these are not connected TVs. This is Comscore. It's mostly mobile devices. So spending, we saw that piece of data and we knew that there was a market there. So for us, we're seeing north of an hour a month on mobile. I mean, consumers will sit there and spend 30, 40 minutes at a time every time they start a mobile session. So these are not casual sort of quick hits. These are consumers really engaged and immersed in a piece of content.
And the platform question actually ties back to your earlier question of what ad units are working or what sort of ad load works, right? And it could be the same piece of programming, could be a different ad load in AVOD depending on the platform. Where if you are watching a long form movie on mobile, your propensity to watch a number of ads in the breaks might be a little bit more when you're sitting in the living room on the big TV, as opposed to sitting on the bus, on the mobile device. So we've seen different combinations of that, and back to that other question too of a 30-second pre-roll on a 8-minute cartoon works perfectly, but you may have 35 ads in a long form movie playing out on a living room, right? So and for us as a technologist, right, what we want to do is give the tools to the distributors and to the programmers that whatever they determine how the monetization works, well, our job as a technologist to be able to go, yes, right? We want this combination or this combination. Our job is just to be able to say yes and enable that to happen. And it's certainly, it's different. The answer is different on ad loads across programs and across platforms, which make it challenging, but fun.
So do you, Chris, do you have,
go ahead. Sorry, well, just to add on that, I mean, the other thing that is interesting is that we're seeing, mostly in the US, but also a little bit in LATAM, we're seeing more and more 6-second ads, right? We're seeing a lot of advertisers embrace really short ads, and that just makes it a lot easier for you to build a compelling experience. I think Target is doing a great job of it in the US, for instance, with they'll not only have shorter ads, but they also have tremendous variety of creatives, which allows you to segment really, really well. So I think also the way advertisers think about all this is changing, and it's going to make the issue of ad load, less of an issue, because the ads are becoming better, more relevant, more targeted, and consumers are less inclined to be put off by them.
Very interesting. I was wondering, Chris, if in that context that you were explaining, do you actually have full visibility whenever there's this situation that you have a user accessing content through a smartphone, but they might be actually casting and the actual viewing device is the smart TV in the living room? Do you have full visibility whenever that happens, or you just see that there's a mobile device taking the content?
We have the advantage of because we're sitting in the middle between what the programmer's putting out there and what the distributor is enabling, and we're really sitting on both sets of data. That leads for a tremendous amount of insights, and certainly there's all sort of privacy and confidentiality and all sorts of things that go along with having that responsibility. But what it does is, absolutely just provide for a whole bunch of insights. A lot of times we'll work with our programmers or our distributors to say, tell us what you're trying to find out, because I can't just do this huge data dump to you. Or if I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna have to charge $1 million that you're not gonna wanna pay. So, there's ways to sort of ask the question for us. And, we've got an analytics team that takes those questions in and turns back the answers to the programmers and the distributors, because it's a more controlled way to do it. But yeah, there's all sorts of that data and mining that data, which is the other trend I see, right? A few years ago, we sit on a panel like this, and it was called the panel of big data. And you kind of got on the panel and you said, what's big data? And 10 million people would disagree and say it was a whole bunch of different things. Now that what we're seeing is that people are very focused with their questions. I want to know this. I want to find out this to get to monetization. So many things back to what we were saying before. What is the proper ad load on the proper platform, on the right programs or the right genres, and all sorts of things. So it's interesting. Data isn't just big data anymore. It's actually very specific data with specific outcomes that can be monetized.
I'd like to remind everyone that you can send any questions you have to our panelists today. To do that, go to the Q&A section of the tool. Let us know if you want to whom the question is addressed, and we'll take it at the end of the session today. Chris, why don't you describe very briefly, but how the AVOD OTT ecosystem works? Because you need to ensure really, as a technology supplier, that both critical conditions are met. On the one side, you have the consumer, and you really need to provide a seamless experience where the using experience is not compromised. You don't have any sort of bufferings whenever an advertising is popping up. And on the other side, you have the advertisers who are really demanding a whole set of data from that experience. And that's really the key of the question. So how that ecosystem works from a technical point of view, briefly.
Yeah, well, that word briefly. We'll try to do it briefly now. There's a long chain of events that have to happen, and it's still amazing to me that it happens in a millisecond. Right, all these decisions, all these things play out in a millisecond, which is is still amazing to me after 10 years of doing AVOD. But it has to appear to the consumer as having the same quality as linear TV, which is the standard, right? It just needs to work in the consumer's eyes. And things can go wrong at about 20 stops along that process, along the chain of things needing to get done in a millisecond. And we've got a couple of chances with the consumer to get that experience right, or they're just going to claim, oh, the service doesn't work, and they go choose another app. So no matter if it's a pay TV ecosystem or an OTT ecosystem, the flow is the same, and the stakes are the same. So you need to make sure things such as the program metadata, that it is correct so you can target on it. And all the programs need to be available for playout. Sometimes you'll find you actually think something got pitched out or something's available and it isn't for some reason. So the programs need to have the correct metadata, and they need to be there. You need to ensure that same process is in place with all the ads. Just because the ad was pitched out, that doesn't mean it's actually available, or that the metadata has to be correct. You need to make sure, we spoke about ad breaks earlier. So you need to make sure that the breakpoints are all marked correctly in every single program so that the technology knows where to insert the ad. So these are all the things that cause buffering and timeouts that we can control, right? Certainly, if the Wi-Fi connection's bad in the home, that's all on the consumer. But certainly there's tons of things that we as distributors and programmers that we can control to make sure it's a quality experience. And then you mentioned data. So after all that plays out, you need to make sure the reporting, all the data coming in, that it's scrubbed. You look for any abnormalities that just don't feel right for some reason. You dedupe that data out so you're getting accurate reporting and measurement. And you need to make sure all that gets back to the programmer and then back out to the agency in a quick and secure manner. So hopefully that was brief enough, but a whole bunch of stuff that that can certainly go wrong, and you need to watch it like a hawk.
Thanks for that, Rafael. We're clearly, whenever we're talking about advertisers really having this demand for the data, that's what they're paying for. There is, on your side, an accountability issue that you need to be able to show them the metrics behind what's happening. In that context, it would be interesting to know what sort of different pricing models you have as the platform, the service supplier to the advertiser. How do you have different ways of opening up
we're
catalog?
pretty flexible. Yeah, I mean, we're pretty flexible. I mean, I think for the most part, it's still a CPM model, right? That's kind of, I would say, the vast majority of cases, we're still talking about a CPM, but we're certainly able to price it on a cost per view, right? That's certainly something that we're doing. We're looking at, in some markets, to look at kind of ratings equivalents, right? So we're in discussions with Nielsen in the US to try to be able to price it in a similar way that linear would price it. But I think today it's still CPM and CPV, and most advertisers are comfortable with one of those.
Sorry, Chris, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I'm being. We found early on in the US, as a technologist, we don't get into what's the value of the inventory, right? So a programmer, they may charge a CPM, and a different programmer may charge a CPM based upon everything that they're doing in the programming. Also, we don't necessarily get into the CPM value, the pricing of that. What we did do early on was to establish that in AVOD, on set-top box AVOD in the US, that the first frame in play mode was the measurement. When we said what constitutes an ad impression, that we put forth that it was the first frame in play mode. And that's stuck for the last 8 some odd years. That's what people are paying on. That's where it is. It certainly took care of a bunch of questions of, what if the consumer fast forward through the ad? We're like, well, as long as you fast forward through the first frame of the ad, then you're not paying for it. And then they were like, oh, okay. What if? And then people came up with all these scenarios, and the quick answer was simply, you pay for the first frame in play mode. And like I said, that's stuck, and that made it just pretty easy for folks. We know on the OTT side, the Hulu guys came out years ago and said, well, it's 100% completion. Frankly, I've never agreed with that as a technologist. We enabled the ad, we put forth the ad. We certainly keep track of quartiles and how long people are through the ad. And certainly if programmers and agencies want to argue that point and do deals upon that point, obviously we'll put that those data points out there. But as far as should someone pay, or the measurement of that, we say that's first frame in the ad playing out in play mode.
Okay.
I mean, on the OTT side, what we've seen is, yes, there's some that get transacted on 100% completion, and that's the CPV piece of it, right? On the CPM side, it's typically a CPM, but they have some sort of viewability threshold and completion threshold, right? And metric that they're trying to hit. So there's companies out there like Moat, Integral Ad Science, that will actually, measure that, and a lot of our campaigns already have that embedded in them. So we have kind of a third-party arbiter, if you will, that's providing these data back to the advertisers, so they're comfortable that they got what they're paying for.
Rafael and Chris, you're both based in the US, and whenever we talk about advertising and the US and the TV industry, the concept of the old concept of dynamic ad insertion is a concept that worked really well in the US, not so much in Latin America, really. For some reason, it didn't really work. Do you think that the combination of now AVOD, OTT, and addressable advertising is something that will bring new opportunities for, I'm thinking again in terms of service providers and advertisers in Latin America?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's no way around it, right? I mean, I think that first of all, you have these giants in Google and Facebook that are selling all this stuff and doing really well in Latin America, right? So that's pushing, I think, the entire industry in one direction. But also, we now have the capability to do it on the OTT side. We have the capability to do it on the traditional side. So I think it's something that advertisers are going to, basically demand, right? If you want to be competitive, you're going to have to be able to deliver that.
Yeah, we've been LATAM for the last 2 years now, and boy, within the last 6 months, well, we've got RFPs, we got MOUs, we got LOIs, all sorts of actions happening on the programmer side and on the distributor side, which is fantastic. We're seeing that same sort of activity up in Canada, so we're really bullish on taking the monetization and everything that we've learned in the US and bringing that expertise to Latin America and up to Canada, and really doing a heavy North American push. And yes, I absolutely, that people are finally, I guess, down in Latin America, seeing the value, seeing the monetization. And like Rafael said, I mean, now it's really becoming table stakes. And both, and you could say it's because of the pressure from from FANG, from the Googles, and the ability to scale all those technologies globally. And so us on the pay TV side, we've obviously had to keep pace with the technology because of that. And well, we're meeting the challenge, and it does all go back to the consumer, right? Back to what we were saying before, the consumer just expects it. Consumer just expects that they're going to be able to just get their program whenever they want, wherever they want it. We've kind of set up that expectation. So yeah, now we're definitely seeing LATAM meeting that challenge.
And is it a pan-regional phenomenon, do you think? Because I'm thinking one thing we've noticed is that, for example, within Latin America, there are certain markets where the demand for this type of technology is greater than others. We've noticed Mexico, for example, is a market where there's strong demand for addressable advertising, perhaps, and programmatic, perhaps not so much in others. Do you notice any subtleties in terms of geographic difference, or at the moment is something that it's a unified phenomenon?
Yeah, I mean, on our end, definitely we see Mexico a little farther ahead in terms of both programmatic and just connected TV overall, right? So on both fronts, Mexico, I would say, has a little bit of a head start against the rest of the region. We're the other market that we're heavily invested in is Brazil, and that's a market that is, even though it may be lagging in some respects, I think it's going to catch up really, really quickly and become really the sort of the bellwether for the region, right? So I think in Brazil, you're going to see Amazon, Roku, Samsung all invest heavily in connected TV deployment. You're going to see the traditional players invest heavily in addressability. So I think that quickly is going to transform that marketplace. And actually, Globo is kind of leading the way, right? Globo they just announced a partnership with Disney and to bundle Disney Plus and Globo Play, for instance, right? So Globo is embracing this, and the Globo Play piece is a hybrid AVOD, SVOD. So I think that that's going to be kind of a huge sort of momentum builder for AVOD and then all these addressable technologies in Brazil.
Yeah, and we've seen same thing, echo that. I mean, yes, I agree. Mexico, we're fielding a lot of questions from that market. Chile has actually always been pretty active in terms of things. Caribbean, Panama, yeah, that's all. I mean, we're really seeing a lot of interest coming from just various places all over Latin.
Good. We are receiving some questions, so thanks for that. We'll take them in a few minutes. Chris, at the same time, the traditional broad reach advertising campaigns will not go away, and to some advertisers that might still be appealing. Do you think there's a dilemma whether you have one or the other? Is it really these broad reach advertising campaigns versus this highly targeted programmatic performance oriented advertising campaigns? Is there a dilemma? Can both live together? What's your take on that, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, for all of my programmers, and by the way, which is 100, we service about over 100 TV networks, right? Everyone from your A&Es, your Discoveries, and your Walt Disney companies, and everyone in between. Yeah, we see the most successful media companies, and Rafael, I mean, you said it in your setup too, and you guys are executing on this. Is really to the full spectrum. You need to start and offer broad reach and be able to just reach as many eyeballs as you can. And then simultaneously, you need to be able to funnel those people down and reach the 5 left-handed bike riders in Mexico City. And certainly
4,500,000, but yes.
4,500,000 bike riders. Or if it's Amsterdam, then everyone rides a bike, but that's another story, right? So that's what we see is really the successful media companies. And you know what, even if they're really large, or frankly, even some of my smaller guys, whereas they can play more in that sponsorship area and tying the programmers more to their talent because they may own the talent and things like that. So no, I don't think there's a dilemma at all. I think the real dilemma is if you don't do it, that you really need to have a balanced media plan that offers broad reach and specific targeting. And you need to be able to do it efficiently, I guess is the other thing, right? Anyone can sort of do it, but you need to be able to do it efficiently, because if you try to be all things to all people and spend a lot of money doing it, you're not going to get anywhere. So certainly technology helps in making it more efficient.
You have to look at it from the perspective of the advertiser, right? I mean, different advertisers are going to have different goals and objectives. Some of them are mass market advertisers and they need broad reach, and that's really what they care about. They're not really that focused on micro segments. But then there's a ton of other advertisers, and sometimes they're the same, right? Sometimes it just depends on the moment and the communication objective that they're trying to achieve. Yeah. So you have to look at it from their perspective. There will always be a need and value in reaching a ton of people with impactful advertising, right? That's incredibly valuable, whether it's Super Bowl or soccer or whatever you wanna call it in terms of mass media events. Those are incredibly valuable because there's advertisers that need exactly that. But then there's another segment of advertisers that require just very fine targeting and have very specific goals and objectives that are not possible to achieve without that target.
Another, and I see one of the questions I'll mention that is coming from Jeff Youssef, and he's asking, is it better to do both AVOD and SVOD? I'm guessing, Rafael, coming from your mention of the global announcement of a combined AVOD and SVOD model. In Latin America, in your case, it's clear you're on a clearly 100% AVOD business model. Again, I'm guessing it doesn't have to be one or the other. Or do you think really the market is mature and large enough to allow you to just forget about SVOD and concentrate entirely on AVOD?
I really think it depends on the content offering. That's really what it boils down to, right? I mean, I think if you have highly differentiated, exclusive, original content that's competitive or that can compete in the SVOD world, then you should pursue an SVOD model, right? But there's very few, in my mind, there's very few companies that can do that successfully. When you think about it, Disney, which is a pretty big company, had to go out and spend, I think, $70 billion to acquire Fox so that they could then compete with Netflix in that game of SVOD, right? So that's just to put it in perspective, right? You're talking about Amazon, Netflix, Apple, now Disney, Viacom is doing some of it. But, it's a short list of people that are going to be able to invest billions of dollars in amazing original content to compete in the SVOD space. I think if once users are used to paying $10 a month and getting $12 billion of new content every year from Netflix, right? They're not going to want to pay $12 or $10 to get $100 million of new content from someone else, right? So I think you have to understand that it starts with content and what is the value proposition that you have to the consumer, for the consumer. And then ultimately, you also want to make sure consumers are overwhelmed with messaging and brands and streaming services. So you need to stand for something. I think if you start to, say, oh, okay, here's Vix and here's AVOD, but then I have this small SVOD piece, can dilute your messaging very quickly, and then it can be confusing to a lot of consumers. And number one question we got when we launched is, are you charging me? That's the number one customer service question that we got for the first 6 months. Are you charging me? Please don't charge me. Is this really free, right? That's really so it's hard to then have that dual messaging. So I think that you almost have to find your lane and stick to it. That will be my guess. Now there's I think a Globo, a Televisa, they will experiment with different models. And maybe it works, but ultimately, when you think about it, Televisa is a free-to-air service. Globo is a free-to-air service, right? I mean, consumers are not used to paying to get Globo or to pay, or Televisa. So, I suspect that a lot of these players will be mostly AVOD or primarily AVOD in the future.
We have a fun little business in addition to serving the AVOD for all of the networks that I mentioned. We actually service the SVOD community in the pre-rolls with their promos. So dynamically insert promos on the pre-roll so that the stars and the Epics and the Showtimes can promote their other programs dynamically to their audience. So back when they were linear services, you could burn that promo in. Someone watched an HBO movie and you were fine, right? You didn't have frequency on that promo. But now in a binging world, when people watch, 6 episodes of an HBO show, if you have that same promo burnt in, you just start to lose the effectiveness of it. And quite frankly, you start to piss off your consumer. So we've found a fun little niche business in making those SVOD promos dynamic. And now you can just say, hey, frequency capping, has the person just binged? Did they see that more than twice? All right, then flip out and show them another ad. And also back to the data question you had before, we can look at the data and just say, hey, did they already watch this program? All right, well, don't serve them a promo for that program. Serve them a promo for a like program. So there's all sorts of interesting things you can really dive in and do, even with AVOD within SVOD.
I mentioned, Rafael, we would expand on some of your concepts at the beginning, and I see another of the questions also from Jeff Youssef is connected with branded content. he asked, is branded content going to be important in monetization, or is mostly programmatic? I think you mentioned a few examples of both branded content and branded channels. Do you want to expand a little bit on how that works and why?
I mean, I think branded content is going to continue to be a very valuable piece of the overall marketing equation, and it's going to be no different in the OTT world or the AVOD world. I think we're gonna. I mean, as well as the spots can connect and deliver reach. You still have a lot of consumers that may be more impacted by a good piece of branded content that they will by a traditional spot, right? So I think advertisers recognize that, especially, and again, it goes back to their objectives, right? So for some marketing objectives, branded content is just better suited. You may be trying to tell a more complex story, so then you need branded content. You can't really do it in 6, 15, or 30 seconds. You need something that's more, that has more of a narrative to it. So I think branded content is going to continue to grow and continue to be a piece of the overall equation for sure.
Yeah, and what we look to do is that combination of, as the industry goes more programmatic for TV, and we're certainly enabling that to happen. The hope is if you use the technology to automate some functions and streamline some functions, that opens the door to really reallocating your resources to do other creative things. So we actually believe that by enabling programmatic and taking care of some of making the spots and dots easier to just traffic through, and that just kind of happens more easily, that leaves for the creative folks within the programmers to have more resources and to be able to do more in the brand and entertainment and in the sponsorship world, so that they can actually get more creative and drive more value to the advertiser.
And Chris, specifically on the TV networks, because we've been touching on all of the different actors of the ecosystems, but when you think of TV networks, how can they take advantage really of the full potential that addressable advertising has to offer? And then I'm thinking both on the linear and on the D2C world that is sort of exploding these days.
Well, look, there's a history both on the digital side and on the TV side that as you target your audience and refine your audience more, the value goes up because you're finding more of that specific consumer that you're trying to reach, right? So as you narrow the target, and we're enabling that to happen in addressable, because the translation to that is, well, then that's more valuable. Therefore, that's worth more to the brand and to the agency, and that hopefully translates into a CPM, a higher CPM. Again, as a technologist, we don't necessarily get into that, but we just want to enable the value to be there. But certainly, that's the game, is to have the value higher and that those addressable targets. And then back to the programmatic side, well, I'm making the spots and dots easier and flowing, and those are easier to buy. So you're kind of working both ends of the spectrum, is allow the spots and dots and your base CPM to work easier, and you're driving more value to the targetability of addressable. And they really do work hand in hand. Thanks
for that. We are now in the last 10 minutes. We see a few more questions coming in. We'll try to take them all. Well, let's go to one of the questions. Is coming from Patrick Casal. Patrick is asking you, what do you think is more likely going to happen in LATAM? Will advertisers migrate spend from linear to tradition to AVOD OTT, or will you see spend shift from social categories, YouTube, Facebook, start expanding to more premium content services? What are the challenges to accelerating that trend? Rafael, I see you smiling. Maybe
good question, Patrick.
It's a very interesting, it's a great question. I think it's a great question, Patrick. So, I would say generally follow the eyeballs, right? If the eyeballs are moving from social to AVOD and OTT, then social would lose out. If the eyeballs are moving from linear to AVOD and OTT, then linear is going to lose out. You know, I have a sense of what's happening there, but ultimately, you know, longer term, I think it just depends on the eyeballs, right? I don't see consumer. I think there was another question around short form. I don't see consumers doing less short form. I don't see consumers doing less social, right? I think that's going to be part of our lives. I think, you know, TikTok is a great example of just over the last year how much more short form content is being consumed by consumers everywhere. So I mean, my today it seems like, at least in the markets that I know, that linear is suffering most of the hits, right? And I don't see necessarily social taking a big hit because AVOD is rising. Well, that could change, you know, that could change.
Yeah, and certainly there is a trend that's starting with because of COVID. We haven't really mentioned it at all on this panel, but that, you know, it's influencing viewing behavior amazingly. People being at home, therefore they're watching so much more AVOD. They're sampling more OTT services. It will be interesting to watch how that plays out over the next 6 months. I think you have a bunch of consumers that maybe have signed up for 6 or 7 OTT services and are watching a whole bunch of AVOD. They're gonna decide where the value is for them. You know, you can't pay for all of those things. Certainly, being AVOD free is back to your, you know, you spoke about, Raphael, is certainly a nice value proposition for consumers to have. So I think you're gonna, you know, see all that play out in the next 6 to 8 months of what services people keep. You know, you could say, oh, linear's dead, but then people just watch the US elections, hours and hours of Fox and NBC and CNN, right? Live sports comes back and they start watching live TV again. So there's, you know, it's all those ebbs and flows. And again, you know, what we see is the successful media company is someone who has the technology in place and the discipline in place to just be able to be, you know, the other big word this year is flexible, right? I don't know, Raphael, how many times you probably heard that a word from your advertisers, but, you know, everything's now about being flexible, which is true, right? When no one really knows what the next week is going to bring. So folks just need to, you know, be able to say yes and be flexible and have the discipline and the technology in place to be able to just adjust accordingly.
Yeah, in terms of, you mentioned, Chris, the US election, I was thinking the past few days, uncertainty in an election might be a bad thing, but when you were looking at those TV ratings from Fox, CNN, what best could they ask for, right? Let the uncertainty go on for a few more minutes, because it was unbelievable, and it's the linear world, and it's happening. Absolutely.
Yeah, I had a mentor, and he was a media buyer way back a long time ago, but he would always buy overtime in sports. Why? Well, because if there's no overtime, then you're not paying for anything because it doesn't air. But if there is overtime, boy, then you have a consumer that's going to be watching your ad, because they are not going to be leaving the overtime game. So, you know, we live in a world now where everything's overtime, and you need to be able to you know, to be able to get into those kind of opportunities quickly.
Just one or two final questions, or one from me, and then I'll take the final questions from the audience. In terms of the generation device that we have, you know, these days, are younger generations more prepared to accept in the OTT world advertising than others? Is there a matter of age, Raphael, do you think, or not necessarily? You mentioned new short formats, and sort of you notice an effort from the advertisers to adjust to a new
to shorter attention
new
spans
reality.
and things of that nature, right? But I think ultimately what we're seeing is really interesting, right? When you look at our average age of a VIX consumer in the US is about 34 years old, right? And when you look at our content, I mean, it's 20,000 hours of Spanish language, right? Content, long form. We have a lot of novellas, a lot of series, a lot of movies, right? It's not that dissimilar from what you would get on a broadcast network in the US, when you think about it, right? It's just that we have all this on demand and you have this linear network on TV. Now, the average age of a linear TV network, or a Hispanic linear TV network in the US is about 49 years old, right? They both, I mean, I don't think the issue is the ads. I think that our consumers are perfectly fine with the ads, but they're not perfectly fine with this having to tune in at 8 p.m. to watch a certain show. They want that flexibility. They want that control. Whereas maybe someone, you know, that's a little older, it's fine. That's they're used to it. But I think as you skew younger, they want to be able to control, you know, when and where and how they watch their content.
Yeah, we've always mentioned that as the main value proposition of AVOD is it's just like TV till it isn't. And the isn't part is, yeah, I want to watch it now, right? So that absolutely, we've always based that as exactly that. That's the biggest value proposition. But you also do need to respect the consumer's time. And
yeah, absolutely.
Right, and that can be a little tricky here and there. It was amazing to hear you say that, you know, you settled on about 4 ads per pod. In the early days, we started with 1, and we went to 2 with our programmers, and kind of went to 3, and then started to, you know, get into 4, 5, and 6. You saw it with the data in a second. As soon as you got the 5 ads per pod or 6 ads per pod, consumers started bailing. They get out of the program, or they started to hit the fast forward button and all of that. So, you know, we came around to 4 with our programmers, just looking at the data, pressing the envelope, seeing where we'll go. So it really is a matter of you know, respecting that consumer's time.
And I think it's increasingly, because of the shorter ad formats, it's really more about the time than the number of ads itself, right? Because you could have 6 ads and, you know, have 2 be 6 seconds, 2 be 15 seconds, and maybe 2 30s, right? And it's still a reasonable amount. It's really about how much time I'm going to have to sit there through this break. If you tell me I'm going to have to sit there for 3.5 minutes, I'm out, right? I mean, I think that's just, you know, that's just a reality. But if you're keep it under 2 minutes, I think consumers are accepting of that, and it feels like the right sort of trade-off for them.
Yeah, which gets back to that other SVOD versus AVOD question that always comes up, and it really just comes down to, hey, Mr. Consumer, is it worth $14.99 to you to not have 3 ads or 4 ads per pod? Like, I know the consumers don't necessarily think of it exactly in those terms, but that's really what it comes down to is, you know, do you want it free with a handful of ads, or do you want to pay $14.99 for it? And they'll, you know, make that subconscious decision, and, you know, we'll all adjust accordingly.
And I think LATAM is going to be even more so an AVOD market than the US, right? I mean, I think historically it's harder to get people to pay up for content to begin with. So I think AVOD is just it's a natural business model for LATAM. I think it's going to scale. It is scaling really quickly, as we're seeing in Mexico already, and we'll see in other markets pretty soon.
Yeah, agree.
We're leading some very interesting news headlines with that remarks, Rafael. AVOD is going to be bigger in Latam than in the US. I think it's one of those. Let me see, 2 minutes, very quickly. Let me see if we have time for these final 2 questions. David Rios is asking, who do you think are the biggest Latam AVOD players? Well, I can say, I think, David, that probably YouTube is going to be the biggest, but let's see if Rafael or Chris, you have your opinions on take on that.
Yeah, I mean, YouTube is the biggest AVOD player globally, right? I mean, if you think about it, YouTube is bigger than Netflix in revenues, right? They just I think a couple of quarters ago, they started disclosing YouTube, breaking out YouTube revenues, and they're actually bigger and growing faster than Netflix. So if you think of YouTube as an AVOD player, they're the largest AVOD player everywhere, and certainly in LATAM. I think, you know, obviously It's not all professionally produced content, right? It's a little, it's not as brand safe for a lot of advertisers. So it's a little bit of a different animal, right, than some of the other AVOD players that we're talking about here. So I think outside of that, I mean, unfortunately, there's really no, there's no official ranking of AVOD players, right? I mean, I like to think we're the biggest, but Pluto is I mean, it varies. I mean, I think we're certainly the biggest if you look at the entire region, just because we're in Brazil and Pluto has not launched in Brazil, and Brazil is a pretty big market, right? So, but if you look at Mexico, where Pluto and Tubi and VIX are coexisting, we've alternated that. I track it by the Android download rankings, right? So, we've all alternated that #1 position over the past, 8 weeks. So I think it's very competitive, and I think that's helpful. I think that there's room for plenty of AVOD players in the marketplace, and I think the #1 thing, I think it's another of the questions there is our advertisers ready? I think the more players we have, the easier it will be to tell that story to advertisers. It was harder for us to sell in Mexico when there was no Pluto, there was no Tubi. We were the only ones talking about this. Now you have, kind of an ecosystem that's being created, and I think that helps the advertiser understand the opportunity better.
Yeah, and we work with a trade organization called LAMAC in Latin America, actually right down with you in Miami there, Rafael. We believe their members are the very large programming outfits, and a lot of our same customers that are in the US. So we work very closely with LAMAC and enabling those folks potentially in the AVOD market. So we're a big believer in their membership also.
Yeah.
Rafael, please, thank you very much. Very insightful comments from both of you. Thank you to our audience. Thank you to Canoe, the sponsor of this session. Welcome, everyone. You're always one step away from the next virtual session, so stay alert. Thanks, everyone. And just a reminder that this session has been recorded, so it will be available on the Dataxis website starting from tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Have a great day. Bye.
And you. Bye.